I think that's a great question, and I'm going to answer it with both yes and no at the same time. So is there an abundance of data? In certain areas, for sure. Like we subscribe to, as an example, a number of third-party data providers, as well as some of the financial services providers. They've got over thousands of ESG-related metrics on a particular issue. That is an awful lot of data. But my answer, I would say no, is when you start digging deep in what type of data it actually is. And I think that's where you start leads to your question number 2, when you run into some challenges. So for example, if you look at carbon emissions data, there's a couple of ways that you can find that data. It can be reported by the company itself, which is great, and that's probably the best source that we're looking for. But still then, we want to understand how the company has tracked the data and how reliable the data is that they use. Particularly if you start looking at scope number 2 and scope 3 is even more challenging. Then the other question, data that you could have when it comes to carbon emissions, is it can be modeled data by a third-party provider. So what are the modeling assumptions and what is the peer group that is determined? Then the third category, the data field might be blank. So how are we dealing with that? That's just one set, particularly if you look at carbon emissions. There's also regional biases. If you look again at your 4,000 metrics, E or G is generally most covered and we have most data available. E is definitely getting up to speed, but the S data is very patchy. There's a focus on human rights policies and a little bit on health and safety. But other than that, there's big gaps in the data. There's also big gaps in the data if you look at the various regions, with Europe providing a lot more disclosure. The US is picking up. Asia has traditionally been lagging behind, but picking up pace really quickly, particularly if you look at the way that Japan has picked up the TCFD. So overall, there's an awful lot of data, but you really have to look for what the data is.